Our first speaker is Calvin Welch, who is a Haight-Ashbury Neighborhood Council board member and longtime community organizer. Calvin, you have the floor.
Thank you, Art. My piece of this discussion is to try to address the confusion that exists in many people's mind around the term affordable housing and what affordable housing means. The confusion stems from the reality that affordable housing is both an advertising term and a technical term that is defined in both city and state law. Excuse me a moment.
Calvin will be back with us in a moment. There he is.
Sorry, I had to kill a dog, but the confusion is between the usual term or the advertising term of affordable housing, which oftentimes is you'll see on billboards, a condominium affordable price at $1.5 million. People have a great deal of confusion around affordability. So let me try to take you through the steps of the, if you will, official, both state law and local law define affordable housing. As a general rule, there is no housing able to be supported by public money that is more than 120% of area median income, AMI. So let's, when Mayor Breed talks about affordable housing being 160% of AMI, she is blowing smoke. That is not affordable housing in most of the neighborhoods in San Francisco. That is above market rate, even. So let's try to break down what is meant by affordable housing. There are three component parts of the official definition. One is no household that receives government funding for affordable housing should pay more than 30% of their gross income for housing. So that's the first definition, that affordable housing is housing that doesn't cost you more than 30% of your gross income. The second is the notion of a average median income, a difficult concept that is a construct basically manufactured by the Department of Housing and Urban Development. HUD is the national agency that allocates affordable housing funding, and more importantly, defines the actual amount in each part of the United States. You will understand, of course, that average income varies throughout the United States. That what is an average income in San Francisco is considerably more than what the average income in Billings, Montana. And so HUD is charged with creating a national system that defines affordable housing based upon geographic area. And it does so by creating a statistical area that is a combination of local areas, and then uses census data, etc., to define what the median income in that area is. San Francisco is part of a statistical area for the purpose of creating affordable housing average median income that includes, and this is a critically important part, that includes Marin County and San Mateo County. So the San Francisco area is in fact Marin, San Francisco, and San Mateo counties. San Mateo and Marin counties are the two highest income counties in California, which is the second most highest income state, if not the first most highest income state. So San Francisco's area median income is the average between San Mateo County, Marin County, and San Francisco County. You can understand that that makes housing median income higher in San Francisco than most San Franciscans make. Nonetheless, that is the reality that we face given the statistical methodology used in San Francisco. The final of the three definitions of area median income is household size. You can understand that a household with one person earns one amount, and a household with two earning people earns another amount, and a household with two people and four kids earns another amount. So the way in which HUD defines area median income is also by household size. So there's three definitions or three components to what is affordable housing officially, not the advertising term, not the PR term, not the political term, but what is defined in state and national and local law, which uses the term affordable housing. If we could call it something else, we might be able to get through some of the confusion. Unfortunately, we don't. We use the term affordable housing. So the three categories are not paying more than 30% of your total household income for housing, a percentage of median area median income, which is defined by HUD every year, and third, dependent on household size. So, Michael, can we have the first slide, please? Last year, the Council of Community Housing Organizations, well, okay, we'll just go to this one. This is the 2023, the most recent definition by HUD of area median income. For those of you who are on Social Security, for example, the average Social Security payment in San Francisco is about $1,100 a month. That would mean that in terms of area median income in San Francisco, $1,100 a month would be less than 15%. Less than 15% of the area median income. It would be less than $15,000 a year for a single person. Paying no more than 30% of your total household income for housing would mean that a unit affordable to a person earning 15% of area median income, as you can see, that's the top left-hand corner of this graph, 30% of 15,000 would be about $3,000, huh? So that works out a month, huh? To 12, $3,000 divided by 12. That's an officially defined affordable unit able to be occupied by a person earning Social Security, average Social Security benefits in San Francisco. And you can see that the median income in San Francisco for a single person, if you go midway down to 100% of median, you will see that that is $100,000 in San Francisco. That's median income, is $100,000 for a single individual, $115,000 for a two-person household, $130,000 for a three-person household, all the way through. Paying no more than 30% of your total household income for housing will determine the rental or household payment that you will receive in a government-funded affordable housing development. Let's go back, if we can, Michael, to the previous. What I want is it would be figure 1. As I say, in 2022, 2023, the Council of Community Housing Organizations and the Labor Council took a look at working people and what working households earn by activity, by economic activity. So we have, for example, the top flight person here. It's hard to read, I understand. The top category is a registered nurse who earns $162,000 a year. That is more than median income. If you go back to the other, you can go back and forth. So, however, once you are dealing with a teacher, an educator, or support staff, they're making about $77,000 a year. And it goes from there. A home healthcare worker makes about $35,000 a year. So housing is a function of income in a critically important way. It's not some abstract number that this is affordable, and we should set city policy to produce units that are able to be afforded by people earning only median income and above. If we do that, we lose most of the service personnel, service workers that were so critical during the COVID pandemic. We lose most seniors. We lose most people at risk of homelessness. And that is the critically important notion when the mayor currently, the city is undergoing a major proposed rezoning. And that rezoning will primarily be aimed at producing thousands of market rate units, not affordable units, although the mayor will call some of them affordable, those between 140 and 160% of median. Although, as we can see from this graph, a significant number of working people, of employed people, of unionized working people would not be able to afford any of that housing. So I hope I've clarified, or at least consistently confused all of us, so that we might be able to ask the right questions. I'm done.
Thank you, Calvin. Okay, we're now going to open it up for 10 minutes for Q&A. So if you have a question, raise your hand. By doing this or going to your reactions and clicking on the raise hand icon. And we also have some questions that have been prepared in advance. So Karen, do you want to ask a question?
Yeah, these questions came from our new housing activism leader, Ozzy Ron. She was not able to be with us today, but she had a couple of questions. One of them, Calvin, had to do with being out. And what she said about that was San Francisco seems to charge less in being out than what it costs to build a unit. And so why doesn't San Francisco get rid of this being out policy that that the developers have to provide when the building has apartments with more than 10 units? Her other concern about that was when they fee out, they put in money, as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, they pay money instead of building units within their building. So the money then goes into a fund that creates housing in another area. That area may be much less desirable than the original building. And her concern was that it's not enough money to build. And in addition, it adds to discrimination, segregating people out.
Is that a question or a
Yeah, well, it was meant to be a question. I think she put it in form of a statement. I tried to get it to you. She wants to know, why do we have this system of being out? Why don't we get rid of it?
Okay.
It's not accomplishing
getting. I understand the question.
Okay, go.
This is a question that only is centered on the city's inclusionary housing program. The inclusionary housing program is a program that requires developers of market rate units to set aside a certain number of units that are, get this, not affordable units, but are below market rate, BMR units. So I think I can show you, I think I've shown you that you can be below market rate in San Francisco and still not be affordable. That it
Yeah.
is possible. I mean, the market rate rent in San Francisco is around $3,000 a month. So you can produce a unit that is $2,500 a month and would be a BMR unit, but still not affordable to the vast majority of San Franciscans who need rental housing. So first of all, understand this is a question that is related to only one housing program, and that's the inclusionary zoning program, which produces not affordable units, but below market rate units. State law governs how cities can make inclusionary zoning work. And state law and court cases have decided that developers must be given the option, because they're using no public money, it's all their own money, okay, must be given the option of producing the unit on site, paying a fee, or providing an off-site unit to meet the requirement. Okay? Because BMR units do not use public subsidies, but are totally dependent upon developers' investments, state law and court decisions have determined that cities must allow them to meet the obligation in those three ways: on-site, off-site, pay a fee. The terrible thing about the fees in the San Francisco ordinance is that the fee level is set to be the difference between what a market rate unit costs and what an affordable unit would cost. Not the cost of an affordable unit, but the difference. So it may take 4 fees for a BMR unit to equal the actual cost of producing an affordable unit. So the fees, most folks in the business don't want fees. They want the units. They don't want fees, yet state law requires it. So, that's a preemption issue. We don't have the option to require a developer to produce the unit.
Thanks, Calvin. Dolores or David, you want to go ahead?
Sure.
A little louder.
Yes, I'm just as an example, I'm interested in this new building that's going up on the corner of Stanton Street and Haight, and that is advertised as affordable housing. You know which one I mean, I'm sure. It's been in the works for 2 years, and now they're putting the signs up that say affordable housing. And how would you describe, do you know very much about that? Maybe you know about that history?
I know far more than I ever wanted to know about that development. I live in the Haight-Ashbury. I'm co-chair of the Coalition for a Complete Community, which has advocated for the project to be 100% affordable and to have no unit more than 100% AMI. In fact, the 130 odd units will all be below 80% of median. That's for 50 years or the life of the building, whichever is longer. That is a legitimate government-funded affordable housing development at 730 Stanton. There will be, in addition to families with children, which will be the largest number of units, there will also be an additional set of units for young people, people who have been aged out of people that are basically on the street in the Haight-Ashbury, and that average will be around 35–40% of median. Avi works for the nonprofit housing developer that is, in fact, doing the construction phase and can fill in, I'm sure, any more information that you might have. But that is a legitimate, no more than 30% of their income for housing that is going to be available to people earning 80% of median or below, some as low as 35% of median, and it will be a permanently affordable housing development.
I just have one more question. So on the ballot, can you recommend any ballot measures that we should vote for or
We'll get
against?
into that later, I think. Can we, we're running out of time on this Q&A period. Maybe you could answer that later. What we decided in advance is to ask a final question of each speaker, and that is, what is the one thing we can do today to begin the work of getting truly affordable housing in San Francisco?
In my opinion, and I do not bind Charlie or Avi on this, there is replace Mayor Breed. Mayor Breed is without question the most anti-affordable housing mayor, in my humble opinion, that we have ever had in San Francisco. She has placed impediments, refused to allocate money allocated by the board to purchase. She refuses, at the height of the real estate depression in San Francisco, she's refused requests to land bank, to use the market at its best when prices are lowest. Even if we don't have the money to further develop the units, to buy property at the lowest price and bank for affordable housing development. She refuses to do that. She refuses to build affordable housing on sites that were purchased for the express purpose of developing affordable housing. She sets the policy of the planning department, the Department of Building Inspection, and the Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development. She is critically important. You can ask me later why local government is so critically important, but the one thing that we can do is replace Mayor London Breed, in my humble opinion.
Okay, thank you, Calvin, for presentation and for answering questions in that brief Q&A. Hopefully we'll have some time at the end, but we've got to move on to our next speaker now. Charlie Shamus is the Policy Director of the Council of Community Housing Organizations. And you have up to 20 minutes, Charlie, to tell us how we can get affordable housing in San Francisco.
Thank you, Art, and thank you everyone for inviting me to be part of this conversation. I was asked specifically to speak about two ballot initiatives. One is the local Proposition A, and the other one is the state Proposition 1. So I'll do my best to summarize each of them and then also mention opportunities for you to be involved in some of the advocacy that's happening around affordable housing. So I'm here on behalf of Council of Community Housing Organizations, affectionately, folks call us Choo-Choo. We are 22 organizations that are rooted in neighborhoods throughout the city, and have been involved over last few generations in helping to advance more of the community-based solutions around housing affordability. And that also means partnering with the city to acquire and to develop affordable housing, and really working hard to stabilize a lot of the local communities throughout the city that are experiencing housing insecurity. So housing insecurity is a really important kind of like center part of the conversation. You know, many of us are touched by it. Either we've lived it, we are living it, we're limited by the options we have for our housing. And that's really because the majority of housing that the city has created is very expensive for everyday people. Based on the most recent analysis, the city has built less than 50% of the affordable housing that we need. So that means that people with very low incomes are priced out of the rental market. It means that young people coming up in the city are having a really difficult time imagining a future in their own hometown. We know that this is affecting so many sectors of the workforce. Our educators are unable to live in the communities where they're teaching. Our local workforce can't live in the city where they work. So Proposition A is kind of one of the ways in which we can address this question around how the city is approaching affordable housing. And that's really because building the long-term resources to stabilize our local economy, to support our local workforce, and to achieve our affordable housing goals is really one of the most important decisions that the city is making over these next few years. Proposition A is our chance to move us closer to being able to achieve the affordable housing goals that we signed up for as a city, and also that were mandated by the state. So the way that Proposition A is set up is that there's three different buckets of investment. Of the $300 million, one kind of portion of that, the largest portion, would go towards building, acquiring, and rehabilitating new rental housing for extremely low, very low, and low-income households. And that means housing that would serve working families, for seniors. And then it would also have another bucket that would be for preservation efforts. And what this means is usually for acquiring a new multifamily housing that is currently privately owned and converting it to affordable housing that would be usually stewarded by community-based nonprofit organizations in partnership with the city. And the last bucket of investment would be for, again, creating new affordable housing, particularly to serve one segment of the community, which are low-income women who need safe and stable housing and are experiencing different forms of trauma related to homelessness. So that's $30 million for the last area of investment, 30 for the preservation, and 240 million for the new affordable housing. The way Proposition A is set up, it's a general obligation bond. The city has a policy of not putting new bonds on the ballot until they've retired past bond debt. And so this means that there's no impact on property tax rates, and there's no impact on rents by approving a city-sponsored general obligation bond. It's building upon the track record from previous general obligation bonds. The last time the city issued one was in 2019. And that 2019 bond was adopted by 71% of the voters, and over kind of the course of that bond, it was able to support over 1,600 new affordable units. In addition, it was able to provide assistance for the rehabilitation of nearly 1,000 public housing units, and then also had a more modest impact on new preservation efforts by supporting the preservation of 100 homes through the Small Sites program. It also had a small level of support for moderate income first-time home buyers to assist them with down payment assistance. So there's many projects that have been coming up around the city that were supported by that previous bond. For example, 725 Harrison in the SOMA in the Filipino Cultural Heritage District. Those are new affordable homes serving many of whom are formerly unhoused individuals. The 4200 Geary project that's coming up in the Richmond now is under construction. It's a 100% affordable senior housing development. And it also includes units that can provide very deep levels of affordability because of additional assistance through local operating subsidy support. As a general obligation bond, Prop A requires strong government oversight. It's subject to independent annual financial audits. Unlike many of the other cities' kind of affordable housing investments, bond programs require very kind of like rigorous review. There's a citizens oversight committee. There are specific requirements for how funding can be used, with prohibitions against use for administrator salaries or pensions, and a requirement that all funds are spent on specific housing projects that are outlined. So if Proposition A were to pass, it would allow us to kind of address the backlog of projects that a lot of the community housing organizations and local communities are hoping to move forward. There is a huge backlog under this administration. It's been very challenging to be able to move forward affordable housing projects. We've heard from the city that a lot of the existing funding is actually going to dry up by the end of 2024. So this affordable housing bond would help to replenish some of those funds that are needed. It's kind of one of the unique propositions that are on the ballot this time around, in that it actually enjoys kind of a broad range of support from the Board of Supervisors to the Labor Council, the United Educators, including the Mayor's Office, and many of the community organizations and neighborhood associations. But as a general obligation bond, it does have a higher threshold. It requires 66% of the voters approving it, which is very difficult to achieve. And so it's really important for us to be able to make our case to the voters for why it's important to pass. So those are just some thoughts just around Prop A. And then I could also speak briefly about the state Proposition 1, or I could kind of like pause there just to see if there's any kind of questions that folks have specifically about that proposition.
I prefer you went on with 1 because A is more of a no-brainer, but 1 is a little complicated.
Okay. So I had to do a little bit of homework on Proposition 1. To be honest, we haven't actually taken any position on the statewide initiative. But it's also a general obligation bond, a much bigger one for $6.38 billion, and it would make changes to the state's Mental Health Services Act, and it would have impact on how people throughout the state are accessing mental health services and substance use disorder treatment in their communities. So one of the things it would do is it would change the name from Mental Health Services Act to the Behavioral Health Services Act. It would expand the scope to encompass treatment for substance use disorders, which currently isn't in the provision. And it would also modify how these funds are allocated. And I can speak a little bit to what those changes would look like. Under Proposition 1, counties would continue to receive the large majority of these state funds. However, the allocation across different spending categories would change without having an increase in revenues. So one of those big changes would be that it would require that 30% of the Behavioral Health Services Act funding be allocated specifically for housing interventions. That means that many local counties would have to redirect monies that they currently use for other programs, and it would, for example, mental health services, and it would go directly to housing interventions. It would also require that counties spend 30% of these dollars on housing programs that could include rental subsidies, it could include navigation services, and counties would have to spend half of this money on people who are chronically unhoused in their local jurisdictions. They could also use up to a quarter of that money to build or purchase housing units. The other two kind of buckets of investment would be 35% for partnership programs with community mental health program providers, and another 35% for behavioral health services and supports. So what we've seen is that folks that are supporting Prop A advocate that it would prioritize existing funds and generate new funds for the Californians that experience the most severe behavioral health needs and those that are living without shelter. In addition, this bond seems to be supported by a lot of the big city mayors, as well as many of the behavioral health and housing advocates. Many of the opponents are seeing that Proposition 1 would shift money toward housing and away from outpatient care and crisis response services. It would also change the approach toward the treatment of mental illness and substance use disorders, because it would also allow funding to be used for involuntary or forced treatment. Opponents of Proposition 1 also are anticipating that it would reduce mental health services for many of the BIPOC communities, because many of these funds would then have to be reallocated towards housing interventions. And it might mean that in local counties, that a lot of funding for core services that happen in partnership with community-based organizations might see reductions in contracts in order to accommodate the change in the funding. So that's kind of my short summary of kind of the implications around Prop 1.
Okay, Charlie, thank you. Did you want to say anything else or go to Q&A?
I'm happy to go to Q&A.
Okay, Terry, go ahead.
Yeah, from what I've read, the problem with this is not what it's agreeing to fund. The problem is what it's taking, that it's stealing from Peter to pay Paul, and that it would destabilize a lot of programs that have done a lot of good. And so the governor is kind of playing games in order not to spend more money, and kind of saying you have to use the same pot of money, and that we would lose services that are, once you get someone into treatment and housing, you have to maintain them. And it isn't just housing, it's treatment. And so I'm thinking of voting against it, because there is evidence that a previous bond issue like this did not do what it was supposed to do, because the requirements were too complicated, and it's just kind of going to make a mess of things. It's virtue signaling by the governor, but not. it may not be effective, and it may not help. It may cause damage actually locally. But I don't know, other people can say their piece, but I've kind of decided to vote against it.
Charlie, do you want to respond or let other people ask questions or comment on that one?
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. It's a reprioritization of funds without adding to the revenue in order to expand the scope of work. So I would say that that's a fair assessment.
Okay, see, Karen's got her hand up, and Michael, were you signaling you wanted to say something? Okay, first, Karen, go ahead.
Okay, I have an Aussie question and I have a question of my own, so I'll start with me.
Yes.
On the state proposition, I've never heard of housing intervention. That's a new term to me. Does that have anything to do with conservatorships? Do you know?
That is one of the concerns that has been raised about the scope of Proposition 1, in that it does include language that basically expand the opportunity to require treatment and to mandate treatment. And I know that there are several disability rights and other organizations that are expressing concerns on that grounds. But I don't know in terms of what the official kind of definition is of those housing interventions, but it does include rental subsidies, it does include other programmatic services, and it does include a brick and mortar development of new actual housing units.
Hey, Michael, go ahead, unmute yourself, please.
Just as an observation, it seems to be the same kind of thing that's going on in San Francisco, where the emphasis, instead of being on the lack of behavioral health services, the emphasis is for many people. Instead, the emphasis is on a few people who they say are refusing services. I mean, we have no idea whether they would refuse services if they were more available, if they didn't have to wait for so long. So I think it's very distracting. Thank you.
Okay.
Can I do Ozzy's question now?
Okay.
Okay, her question focused on the local measure, and I'll read it to you. How can we ensure that the Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development spend the money from this bond measure on building affordable housing? After all, if the mayor always has the purse strings, the funds allocated for affordable housing hardly ever get spent.
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and I think it's it is affecting kind of overall how the city is acting on its affordable housing investments. I would note that general obligation bond investments have, I think, a little bit more insulation than other general fund investments that the city and the mayor have more direct control over, in that because there is a spending plan that has already been allocated that accompanies the measure Proposition A, there is an oversight committee and an annual audit that's required, that those funds, there's not a lot of maneuvering room, I think, for the mayor to be able to reallocate those funds in the way that there is for general fund spending. But it's a very relevant question I think we're grappling with kind of as a city, which is, on the one hand, we may be making kind of innovations and trying to expand the set of resources in order to be able to have more affordable housing, and also more meaningful affordable housing that is really responsive to the housing insecurity that we see throughout the city, and then we'll experience roadblocks at different levels as a result of kind of interventions from the mayor's office. But general obligation bonds are in a separate category, and there's more insulation. I would just offer that.
At this point, I'd like to ask the other two speakers if they have any thoughts on Prop A or Prop 1, unless they're going to address that. I mean, unless Avi, you're going to address that in your time.
I'm
Yeah,
not-
follow
yeah.
up on Charlie's statement. General obligation bonds cannot be used for anything other than the express purpose of what the voters voted on. They cannot be used for anything but capital expenditures. So the mayor cannot reappropriate the money for other uses. The mayor cannot spend it on her staff. The only option that the mayor's office has is not to spend the money. If they spend the money, it's got to be used for the purposes that it's voters required. So it's not the same as general fund money at all.
And hasn't she been pretty good about not spending money like that?
No, she spends all the bond money
She does,
on
okay.
affordable housing.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's the general fund money that she plays games with,
Okay.
especially general fund money that is not specifically by the voters directed to affordable housing.
How about the Hayes Valley project, the parcel K? Is that general? Is that?
That's an interesting. I'm glad you brought that up. Parcel K was purchased with redevelopment agency money that was specifically dedicated for affordable housing. Well, I don't know how to say this simply, but 50% of all redevelopment agency money that was generated from a particular kind of revenue bond called a tax increment revenue bond by local ordinance was required to be spent for affordable housing, either developing affordable housing, buying housing to be developed, or buying land. So Parcel K was purchased with that money and was to be developed in the future as affordable housing. The mayor has never allocated the money from a bond or from the general fund or any other source to actually develop that site. Instead, the site has been basically used as amenities for the market rate housing in the surrounding area. And the folks who live in that housing don't want affordable housing. So Mayor Breed, who claims to be the strong supporter of all housing development, unless it's affordable housing development, has basically acceded to those demands for over 8 years and has refused to allocate money to develop Parcel K. But the parcel itself was purchased with affordable housing money.
Okay, Avi, do you have any comments on Prop A or Prop 1? Or
No, I think Calvin and Charlie covered everything and they're the experts on it. So I wouldn't add anything except to say that me personally and Chinatown CDC, we completely support Prop A. And we, in our own small portfolio, have seen several of our projects supported 100% affordable and supported through the 2019 as well as the 2015 general obligation bond. So yeah, that's it.
before we get to our final question, I have another one. We've they're seen in our old mental health system that housing and treatment were provided together, and when that system was dismantled, it did not. It broke its. The politicians broke their promise to have mental health treatment in the communities. So with this behavioral proposition, it looks like it's trying to merge a little bit of behavioral health with housing. So the other point related to that is I've heard Houston has made good progress, or maybe more than a lot of other major cities, in supportive housing. So maybe, do you have any comments on Houston's experience, if you know of it? And what about the idea of somehow providing housing and treatment together through supportive housing? Charlie, you want to take a crack at that?
Yeah, I'm not as familiar with the Houston example, so I can't speak particularly to that. But the city has an approach to that, which is permanently supportive housing. And absolutely, that program needs additional investments in order to really reinforce the community supports and the housing needs. What Proposition 1 would do is that it's prioritizing many more funds from the state's Mental Health Services Act funding towards that particular purpose, prioritizing particularly the needs of people that have mental health or substance use disorder challenges and are also experiencing homelessness and housing insecurity. So absolutely no critique of wanting to provide important investments to expand that strategy. And in San Francisco, permanent supportive housing does not have the level of funding that is needed in order to achieve the impact that we need, and is a really important model that we want to strengthen. And there are many community-based organizations that are really trying to make that model work of permanent supportive housing. And it's a kind of a challenging environment, kind of like within the city, to be able to allocate the level of resources that are needed.
And the final question, just as I asked Calvin, was what's the one thing we could do today to begin the work of getting truly affordable housing in San Francisco?
Continue to meet and to organize and to inform each other, I think, is absolutely critical. So it's really great to see this group and all the work that you all are doing. And as we've heard, there are many kind of systemic challenges towards addressing kind of the affordable housing system that we want and that we need. But in terms of kind of like something that's much more immediate, you know, the election will be coming up in just 3 weeks. It is for at least affordable housing investments, a pretty high stakes decision to be able to pass Proposition A. We could potentially be in a position where this year we have kind of like a trio of new affordable housing funding measures, with our local Proposition A in March, and then a regional general obligation bond for affordable housing in November, and a state affordable housing bond in November as well. And that's really what we've been asking for a long time. We need to see all levels of government step up to address this important need. So we want to get this over the finish line. And because it requires a 2/3 vote, it's not a sure thing at all. And every ballot that's cast will make a really important impact on the outcome of Proposition A. So there are ways that folks can volunteer, either by helping to volunteer for a phone banking shift, or supporting any of the neighborhood mobilizations that are happening every Saturday throughout the city in particular neighborhoods. And then also on election day, opportunities as well to get on the phones, to get out the vote, and to do some visibility as well. And I just put a form in the chat for folks to be able to see those volunteer opportunities and see if you can sign up for any of those particular shifts.
Thank you very much, Charlie. Appreciate your talk and answering the questions we have for you. And now we move to our third and final speaker, Avi Gandhi. She's a senior planner, community planning and policy, Chinatown Community Development Center, San Francisco, and also a member of the SF Communities Against Displacement Collective. So Avi, you've got about up to 20 minutes, and then we'll do Q&A with you as well.
Sounds good. Thank you. Am I able to share my screen?
Yes, you've been enabled.
Oh, thank you. Okay, thank you. So I was asked specifically to talk about housing opportunities for extremely low income folks and extremely low income households in San Francisco. And thanks to Calvin, he's gone over a lot of the stuff that will help me with this. So I'm going to talk about who constitutes extremely low income in San Francisco. And as Calvin mentioned already, the city as well as this basically the state defines certain income levels and then defines area median income levels for households to fall under. So for extremely low income households, those are defined as households that fall on anything below 30% area median income. So anything between 0 to 30%. In San Francisco, this would mean, say, for example, a 2-person household falling at 15% area median income would earn something around a maximum around 17,000 annually. So that is the income compared to like a 100,000 plus income for 100% area median income household, which is a big gap, as you already can see. And there's no surprise that in San Francisco, over 22%, which is a pretty high percent of households, fall under this income category of extremely low income. And this there's been a steep rise as well, a 15% rise over the years in this number. And this is only like, this is like the second highest income category after the above moderate, moderate income category. So you can imagine the income inequality that reflects. The other big important factor is that a significant share of these extremely low income households are either seniors or on the other extreme are children under 18. So you can see when you compare the different income categories, which are extremely low, very low, low, and moderate income and above, you can see that the blue portion, which is everyone above 65 years of age, is the highest amongst extremely low income populations, and as well as households with children under 18, it's pretty much highest between extremely low and low income households. And no surprise also that people of color are amongst higher shares within the extremely low income categories compared to the higher income categories. Just let's take, for example, the Black community, which is which has like an 11% share amongst extremely low income category, which is more than double the share of the community in our total SF population. And similarly with other people of color populations. And extremely low income individuals are also more likely to experience barriers to economic security and mobility. And I'll just point out one category, which is persons with disabilities. And here again, more than like the highest share, but also more almost a quarter, so 25% folks within the extremely low income household category have reported to be having some sort of a disability. And ELI households also disproportionately experience severe housing cost burdens compared to other income groups. This is, of course, because housing is so expensive in San Francisco that extremely low income households do earn the least. So certainly they pay a fair share of their income on housing, but you'll see more of that in later slides as well. So what are the barriers to affordable housing for these for this income category, extremely low income? The first right off the bat is the problem is that rents are set too high, even in our affordable housing. So even in 100% affordable housing project, rents are set too high to be able to meet the needs of extremely low income folks. So units are generally designated at 50 or 60% of area median incomes, even in affordable housing developments. So you can already see that that's above the 0 to 30% level, which ELI households are at. But even at 30% AMI affordability levels, in some instances, these folks end up paying a very, very high percent of their income just on rent or just on housing costs, which leaves them very vulnerable to displacement, to evictions, with one loss of income or with a slight increase in rent, they can be evicted and may even face homelessness or be displaced. And here you can see very clearly that especially households, whether seniors or persons with disabilities, their median income is almost as much as the rent prices for a one bedroom at 50% area median income. So there's no way they can pay that price. And like I said, most of our affordable housing is priced at 50% area median income. The other issue is that not enough housing as well is being built at all levels, but especially at extremely low income levels. Sorry. And one of the statistics was that in 2019 itself, only about 3% of all new construction was built at ELI for ELI house that was accessible to ELI households, while the total share of ELI households was almost 22% during that time. So yeah, and it has consistently been somewhere around 6%, the new housing that's meant for ELI. And that's not just in the last 5 years, but it's similar statistics through the last like 10 or even 15 years. And lastly, like Charlie mentioned, every city has a state mandated goal to produce certain number of housing over 8-year cycles. And in the last 8-year cycle, we have not produced enough affordable housing, let alone extremely low income housing. In fact, our city planning department did not even break down the housing goals to include extremely low income. It only had very low income, and so on. This is the first time that this last year was the first time that our planning department actually broke it down to include extremely low income households and how many housing we need to produce for them. And we need to produce 13,981, so nearly 14,000 new units specifically for ELI households over the next 8 years, which is 16 times the total units that we've built for that category since 2005. So you can imagine how short we have fallen on that. And to add to that, in its current pipeline, the MOCD, which is the Mayor's Office of Housing, and also has planned in its pipeline list of projects that it wants to build around 1,200 units of housing at 20 to 30% area median incomes. And this pipeline is basically projects that they've already sort of that are already sort of initiated and are within their immediate pipeline. And this is a big number, but currently there is no recognized source of funding, or it's not transparent to us that there is a source of funding that would help them meet that many units and dedicated to extremely low income households. So, what are a few community advocates and community-based organizations, a few of us, what we propose to do, and this is not baked, this is not a fully baked proposal, but we are hoping that it could be something we put out in November of this year, or or maybe even after that, is to create a dedicated and long-term funding so that we can lower rents in affordable housing developments for extremely low-income families, seniors, and people with disabilities. And the concept is basically that the measure would be would amend the city's charter to establish this new fund. And as Calvin mentioned, if it is done a certain way, that is, if it is in the charter and it's being voted by the SF voters as a dedicated fund, then there's very less chances that the mayor can reallocate it or can mess with it or can not spend it. So that's the idea, and we're aiming at something between 30 to 50 million, setting aside that much each year to support. We think this would support over the next 5 years around 2,500 units specifically dedicated to extremely low income families, seniors, and persons with disabilities. And this would be applicable for both existing and newly constructed permanently affordable housing. Like Charlie mentioned, this year we might see a trio of affordable housing bonds, the local one, the state one, and the regional one, which in total would add up to the highest amount of housing bond money that we've seen in many years. But unfortunately, even housing bond funded projects can only subsidize units up to 50 or 60% area median incomes. And we do need to combine those with local operating subsidies or rental subsidies in order for them to actually lower rents to meet extremely low income thresholds. And so this is something that was done even in 2019 when the previous local bond was passed. A few senior, not a few, but a lot of seniors in the city basically demanded that rents should reach basically their SSI income levels, and that the bond alone would not do that. So they advocated for a senior operating subsidies program, which became a pilot program in 2019, which added on subsidies to cover the gap between the 50 or 60% area median income rents and the 0 to 30% area median income rents. And it has up to now, like, successfully been able to produce hundreds of units affordable to seniors. But the SOS was only restricted to seniors. So our hope is that by creating this new fund that is specifically dedicated for this purpose, we build upon the model that was started by SOS, but we expand eligibility to seniors, persons with disabilities and families and families mainly with children or with a single earner who makes minimum wage, because they also don't qualify for the city's affordable housing system. So that's my presentation. Thank you. I will stop sharing.
Thank you very much, Avi. Just right off the bat, I was really inspired to see your last slide and hear you talking about creating a dedicated long-term funding for extremely low-income families, seniors, and persons with disability. So what can those of us in this room help do? What can we do to help get that going? Did you mention what will be happening?
Yeah, I can say a bit because we're we're still in the process and it's not fully baked out on our end as well, but we're trying to meet with a lot of so we don't want it doesn't help for folks to hear from us and to just listen to the data. That's really not as inspiring as listening to people who actually have trouble accessing housing in the city. So that's kind of what we are trying to do right now, is to connect with community leaders and with organizations that serve persons with disabilities. So for example, SDA, which is a Senior and Disability Action, or Self-Help for the Elderly, or the Community Tenants Association. So all these are senior and persons with disability-led, like leadership-based organization. So we heard, we gathered them together and we heard a lot of their stories about how they could not, they have been either applying for affordable housing for the longest time and haven't been able to get through for the longest time because they don't income qualify for the 50% AMI rents, or they have just they have lived their whole lives basically living in an SRO and not been able to move out to an actual affordable housing unit, and have lived in like cramped conditions all their lives. So there were many inspiring stories, and I would say that helps when we go out to the Board of Supervisors to convince them to put this on the ballot, because that's what we need to do. We can collect signatures, but it's a massive number of signatures just because that's what's required, the requirement in the city of San Francisco. It'll be over 500,000 signatures, which would cost, it would be around 50K signatures, which would cost more than 500,000 to get on the ballot. So I think the best way to do this would be to convince the Board of Supervisors to put this on the ballot. And we're hoping as soon as November. So because we know this constituent, like we know the Board of Supervisors right now, what's going to happen after is unpredictable. We know that a lot of folks, at least from the senior and disability end, have been asking for this since 2019. SOS doesn't have a consistent source of funding, and folks still feel like there's a lack. So, there is no better time than now. So I would say, let me know if y'all are interested. I would. We are going to create an email list so we can connect y'all, keep y'all connected through that. But help us if y'all can also have some stories like that and can share that.
Is the Gray Panthers on your email list?
No, not yet. I actually, this is my first time in this space, so I'm really happy to meet you all, but I'll add.
We can help you with coalition building and getting the word out. I'll put the best email in our chat.
I'll just put mine for now because we haven't created a listserv yet.
Okay.
Yeah, but as soon as
we'll email you.
Sure.
Okay.
The floor is open for questions. Go ahead, Tess. Unmute yourself. Oh, there you go.
I'm excited to hear about this senior operating subsidy, and it seems to me it's a workaround HUD's area median. And I wonder if there's any other strategies that have been considered or used or could be used.
I mean, the other strategies that have been used so far would be, I would say, like housing vouchers is a lot of the direct tenant-based subsidies and other similar tenant-based subsidies that have been used. But those are, again, mostly HUD funded or HUD subsidized, and we have seen that those have fallen over the years. And also we've seen that developers get creative and start, discriminating and not accepting applicants with vouchers or with other such tenant-based subsidies. So it's hard. I feel like that's why we're thinking of more of a how do you make units affordable over a long period, rather than saying how can you have a portable or a tenant-based subsidy that tenants would move around with. I think, yeah, that's what we're thinking about, just seeing how the trajectory with housing vouchers has been.
Other questions? I'd like to say, in the absence of that for the moment, that there is, on the March 5th ballot, there are competing slates who want to be the leaders of the Democratic Party in San Francisco, and they have two distinct value systems. And if you research it, you'll find one is more favorable to the issues that we generally talk about here within the Gray Panthers. So I encourage everybody to really, if you're a registered Democrat, to look at that race, because there is a big battle of money against the grassroots going on right now, and it'll be one phase of it will be acted out on March 5th on your ballot. So I encourage you to educate yourselves. And we've had Tim Redmond as a speaker in the past, and I recommend looking at his ballot recommendations to educate yourselves. Karen, do you have any other questions from Ozzy or of your own?
I do not. Sorry about that.
Okay. Well, we have a few minutes left before we begin our membership meeting. I would open the floor for the next 10 minutes to questions to any of our panelists. If you have a burning question that you haven't had a chance to ask yet, now's your chance. I can also add to that right now that I happen to notice that we have a bill being introduced. It's just been introduced in the California legislature by Assemblyman Alex Lee to create social housing in California. Social housing, I think most people know what it is, but it's socially owned, under community control, and permanently affordable. So, and it's been used in places like Vienna, Austria, to good effect, where I think homelessness is virtually unknown. So do any of the panelists have comments on social housing and that method of creating affordable housing?
Yeah, I would urge people to read any assembly bill by Assemblyman Lee very closely. This is his third attempt to try to do a social housing bill that basically undercuts rent control and does end area median incomes. It is a curious and odd formulation. And if you take a look at San Francisco has an ordinance that creates social housing. And I think, unfortunately, Assemblyman Lee has chosen to go a different way. I would urge people to read the San Francisco ordinance and use that as a measuring stick to measure against Assemblyman Lee's measure.
Any other comments on social housing or any other questions?
Yeah, it's very confusing. And so it's almost like you have to ask someone who's really into the weeds before you make a move. It's just, I find it very confusing.
I'll be happy to share with you a long article I did a year and a half ago on Assemblyman Lee's first measure to create social housing, which, as I say, undercuts rent control. The basic notion that Lee posits is that poor people should not live together. That the only real hope for poor people is to get them to emulate middle-class people, which is an odd thing for a person who calls himself a democratic socialist, which Mr. Lee does. But I'll be happy, Teresa, to share with you an overlong article on.
No, I can read it. Yeah, if you want to email me or put your email in here, because it helps to clarify. Because a lot of this poison pill type stuff, like Proposition I, on the surface it looks really good, but my daughter, who's a social worker with the worst of the homeless, is just saying we're going to get defunded. You know, it's not going to help us. Yeah, we need those beds that Proposition I is talking about, but not at the expense of stabilizing people to get them into them. So it's
Any final words from the panel before we close it out and begin our SF Gray Panther membership meeting?
I just wanted to add kind of other, I think, kind of opportunities locally in terms of what's moving forward in San Francisco is that the city is now moving forward to commission a study in order to develop a municipal housing agency and to explore strategies around what our social housing can look like in San Francisco that builds upon the model that we already have, where community-based development organizations are partnering with local communities and the city. And that will be a year-long process and will have many opportunities for community engagement. And so I think it'll be an opportunity to lean in on kind of what our version will look like. And that's coupled with other efforts to be able to charter the first local public bank in the country, potentially here in San Francisco. There's legislation that is currently in the works that would kind of establish the kind of put into practice the business plan that was adopted by the city for a municipal financial corporation and eventually a public bank. So other things to kind of keep tabs on and to continue to engage with in terms of how are we innovating new strategies around these questions of housing affordability.
Thank you, Charlie. And with that, I want to thank our speakers, Charlie Shamus, Policy Director of Council Community Housing Organizations, Calvin Welch, Haight-Ashbury Neighborhood Council Board Member, longtime community activist and organizer, and Avi Gandhi, Senior Planner, Chinatown Community Development Center of San Francisco, and member of SF Communities Against Displacement Collective.